I'm joined now by Andreas Krieg, Senior Lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College London. Andreas, thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk a bit later about the situation on the ground in Gaza. Let's begin, though, with the diplomacy. So from what you've seen so far, does this look like a ceasefire that can last?
It is a ceasefire deal, as you rightly said. It's not a peace deal. It's a ceasefire deal that could last if the mediators' intent, which is to translate these small steps into consecutive bigger steps that can address the thorny issues, the more controversial issues that have been so far left completely out of the negotiation, and ultimately lead to justice for Palestinians' right of self-determination, and actually thereby addressing the root causes of the insurgency, if you will, that have led to Hamas building up into the organization that they are today. As it stands, it's a ceasefire that all it does is really allowing you to get the prisoners and the hostages back, which I think is great. I think it was a very, very significant and well-deserved sort of step to take to get an end to the atrocities being committed in Gaza. But, is it going to hold? It really depends on the thorny issues being negotiated, which is governance, security provision, and some sort of mechanism that allows Palestinians to govern themselves rather than this being some sort of interim solution that will become permanent, as we've seen so many times in the Middle East, in particular in Palestine, where Israel usually obstructs any final settlement and final resolution to keep everything up in limbo and that limbo is usually a sort of situation that they can manage for an indefinite period of time, and then it becomes the new status quo. So that's kind of the big concern. But let's be optimistic. Let's see how we can get to step 2 and 3.
What's happening in the peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh? Is there actually any sort of talking, any negotiation, any diplomacy going on, or is this just sort of a moment for Donald Trump to pat himself and let's face it, everyone else? I mean, all the world leaders are saying this is brilliant. We've managed to achieve this. Keir Starmer as well. Is this just a sort of photo opportunity, or are they discussing something meaningful there?
When Donald Trump gets involved in anything, it's usually a photo op. Shaping the narrative. His entire messaging around this is completely off and completely removed from the reality on the ground. Obviously, as you said earlier, he seems to suggest or seems to believe that he solved what he says 3,000 years worth of conflict, when all he's done is obviously broker a ceasefire. And obviously even there, he was significant, but let's face it, essentially the mediators were key here, and the mediators were Qatar, Egypt, and the Arab countries. And they used Trump to pressure Netanyahu, which is essentially what he did. And in that way, he's done more than Biden, let's put it that way. But that's about the end of that. So I think for the most part, this is a photo op. But what is important is the convening power, the fact that everyone is coming together, everyone is seemingly underwriting the process. Everyone wants this to stop. There is a consensus in the international community that this war must not return to these sort of atrocities that we've seen over the last 2 years. And in that respect, I think this is significant. But the problem is, obviously, Europeans are not playing any role, despite the fact that they're there. Macron has done a little bit better than the UK, than Starmer did. But essentially, Europe is on the sidelines, on the periphery. They haven't played a role in any of this. But they're obviously trying to take some credit. But nonetheless, we do need the Europeans, and we do need the international community to underwrite the process, to convene people, to put pressure, and to make sure that Israel doesn't fall back into the old pattern of using violence to solve political issues. But beyond that, nothing will be negotiated in Sharm el-Sheikh now. But once everyone has confirmed that this is what they want, I think mediators can then go back to the next step to really address the more pressing issues, where I think we'll probably hit some brick walls because I don't see the Venn diagram that's been created by Qatar, Egypt, and the Arab negotiators as being as far-reaching as security arrangements about disarmament as well as governance, where the Israelis want one thing and Hamas wants something completely the opposite. So I think that's when it will really be tested, whether this is more than just a temporary ceasefire.
Earlier today, for a sort of brief time, it was being reported that Netanyahu was going to go to this meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh. That then got reversed, that got cancelled. What's the significance of that? Do you sort of have a read on what that was about?
I think it wasn't let's put it that way. Netanyahu has a long track record of 30-odd years of being a politician first and not really a statesman ever. So he never has the national interest of Israel in mind when he does what he does. He does it to safeguard his own political skin. And I think what he did today, he did that in response to pressure from his coalition partners. So it's really about pleasing the home constituency rather than doing what might be the right thing to do. On the other hand, there's been some pressure as well from opposition from some Arab countries and allegedly even from Turkey, who are saying they don't want Netanyahu to, take some of the limelight of what's been going on because he was the single most obstructive and destructive human being of the last 2 years, obstructing every single opportunity to come to a mediated settlement or negotiated settlement. So he really doesn't deserve to be there. But it also means that Netanyahu has been somewhat sidelined. It also shows that Israel has been sidelined. Obviously, they still have to play a role in this, but it's not like the international community is crediting Israel for having done anything. And so I think, while some people are concerned that Israel might just fall back into old patterns of behavior and everything will, let bygones be bygones and all of this is now water under the bridge, I think this is not the case. It also suggests that the international community still will, there's a lot that Israel has to answer for, and I don't think they're going back to business as usual just yet, which is important. So I think good that Netanyahu didn't come in the end, and good that he had to listen to his domestic audience.
Andreas, I want your thoughts on this. And I suppose to begin, now we're in this ceasefire, is the biggest threat to Palestinians in Gaza the breakdown of social order?
Absolutely. I think, and this has obviously been years in the making, what the Israelis have tried to achieve is a complete destruction of anything that resembles a socio-political order or a civil societal order. They've destroyed civil society. They've destroyed any sort of critical national infrastructure, from hospitals to electricity, water supplies, roads, to governance infrastructure, making it impossible to, even on the local level, to govern the territory. And what they've also done on top of that, and I think we're seeing some of this now, is developing their own sort of networks of non-state actors that they are utilizing to create more chaos. And some of that infighting between Hamas and some of the clans that have been aligned with Israel and paid and armed by Israel, we've seen that unfolding over the last couple of days already. So there's a big concern that this might disintegrate. The security vacuum that Israel leaves behind might disintegrate into some sort of civil war-like clashes, which would be in Israel's interest after all, because usually Israel does that in order to then create a pretext to say we have to go back in to create law and order. It's a little bit like what they've done in southern Syria as well, where they are using the pretext of the plight of a minority within the minority of the Druze community in Syria to not remove themselves from occupied territory in southern Syria that they took over the last year. And so they might do the same in Gaza. So if there was a chaos, if the vacuum that exists on the ground persists for an indefinite period of time, and obviously Hamas being a network in itself that is very decentralized, you have smaller cells that remain in different parts of the territory, but they're unable to govern, they're unable to provide security. If that persists, I think we might get into sort of territories where the Israelis might argue they can't possibly withdraw from the Gaza Strip, which is ultimately what Netanyahu wants. He wants to maintain a presence. And so it's very, very important for the transitional authority set up or to be set up by the Americans to really build up a force quite quickly to help with law enforcement. For the time being, the understanding has been that Trump allows Hamas to operate on the ground to maintain law and order in certain areas. But obviously, the longer this kind of interim arrangement lasts, the more we will probably see internal violence. And so that's a massive threat to what will hopefully be a transition to Palestinian governance, which Israel will try and the IDF will try to undermine where they can.
What stops that societal breakdown? Presumably it can only be Hamas for now, because they've been governing Gaza for a long time, for decades now. There presumably isn't another force that can just immediately come in, or unless that's the Palestinian Authority. We've seen in many of these, it's too early to call this a post-war situation, isn't it? But sort of after the most heightened phase of war comes to a close, it is that state breakdown that can often be just as deadly. So what would be what's the best case here?
Obviously, yeah, you're right. Usually the immediate post-war environment is usually one where, there's time of reckoning, people are trying to settle scores, and I think we're seeing some of that happening now. But like I said, Hamas is not in the state to maintain law and order across the Strip. So, they have been decimated. The leaders have been. So what makes up the organization, the hierarchy, has been completely degraded. And so you're left with certain cells that have been, again, the sort of experienced fighters have been killed. And you're left with these newbies who've been recruited over the last 2 years, who are not very well trained, who don't have a lot of discipline. And so they're certainly an insufficient force to maintain law and order. And then usually when you have these sort of post-war environment where you transition from high-intensity warfare to peace enforcement or stabilization, you have a stabilization force on the ground. So going back to Iraq and Afghanistan, obviously, once the old regime collapsed, the military moved in and created a transitional authority. We had that in Germany after the Second World War. Everything disintegrates. But then you have obviously had an allied command that would take over law enforcement as they cleanse the area of the enemy. The issue here is now that you have a vacuum because, effectively, like I said, Hamas is in a position to govern. You have different non-state actors and clan structures that have effectively governed the territory during the war as Hamas was going underground. And they themselves might not want to surrender authority. And hence why I say it is so important that this new transitional authority will be set up very quickly with an interim international security mechanism that can actually maintain law and order, as well as train as quickly as possible a new Palestinian force, police force that can create and maintain stability on the ground.
Andreas Krieg, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate your time.